You said the same words that they talked about, conduit. It's some sort of a conduit allowing for, they're all connected somehow or another. And somebody mentioned in the chat about go check, Wayne Pierce said, go check 10X for die. I'm like,
Exactly.
yes,
That was my
yes.
that was my question. Like, you see where you drew your circle, where they probably dumped the dye, where they found the dye, connect the dots, and keep on going. You're headed for 10x.
Yep.
You're connected to Smith's Cove is really what
Yeah.
you are. There's clear evidence from my work that this whole thing connects to Smith's Cove. So it's all passing through that whole area on the east side.
Wow.
Question I have, Jeremy, is if they put this dye in, whether it was 8 months ago or 10 months ago or 12 months ago, it really doesn't matter. It's somehow gotten trapped in there.
Yeah.
And in theory, we have flows, ebbs and flows of tidal water going in and out. How does it get trapped?
Well, it's a pretty tortuous path down there. I think that's the best way. Like, there's going to be a lag to it. I think it's not obviously an open pipeline. It's a tortuous kind of. I mean, you guys have all seen cave systems on, in various media, and they're not straight lines. They're very rarely. There could be little pockets, and that's the nature of the beast. That's how it dissolves. It dissolves in little pockets here and there. It's very rarely a perfectly linear kind of process. It's a little pocket here, a little pocket there. They slowly interconnect to create a greater system. And so I suspect that, it's a very complex system down there. You inject it in one spot, it's going to go through this gnarly path, and it will take some time to kind of come out another portal. So.
Yep. Yeah. And
Interesting,
one
because
last picture, and then I'm going to go ahead, Tom, please.
when we saw Spooner take his samples last year from that same area, he didn't pull up anything pink, did he?
No.
So maybe they did the dye test after that. Hard to say.
Yeah. Yeah. This is where it came out. And according to what he was saying, they put it in down here somewhere. And it's showing up there. And then the solution channel you see runs right up through there. But he wasn't in my opinion, he wasn't bailing at solution channel depths.
No.
That's kind of, so it had to have gotten pushed up in there somehow or another.
Their target this year for solution channels was 210 to 215.
Yes. Is that about right for the solution channel, Jeremy, and your data?
Well, there's two solution systems.
Okay.
Cat's out of the bag now. There are two solution systems. There is a larger, more cave-like system, which is the shallower one that we'll say starts at 150 feet. From my calculations, it can be between 15 to 30 feet in kind of thickness. And this plays into that very kind of sporadic, intermittent kind of dissolution process. There is a second, deeper system that exists somewhere in that 200s plus kind of depth, up to, I think I've seen numbers as high as 240, I've heard.
Wow.
So, and very clearly in the seismic, it images two separate systems. But they are very different kind of geometries to them. The upper system, like I said, is more, to me, and that's where I kind of diverge a bit in the theory that it's a channel so much in the shallower depths. To me, it's more of a truly more like a cavern type cave system, but it's filled full of junk, right? And it might lead to some inconsistent or difficult to interpret details from the sonic drill sometimes, I think, because there's so much crazy material and rubble and other stuff down there. But from the seismic standpoint, it really shows a large cavernous kind of low density area, which is what I'd be looking for. And then you have a slightly denser area in some places, and then you see the secondary solution system down deeper, and it's more linear, like it's more, and I have some models, because caves and dissolution systems are very well studied because they have a lot of implications in civil, in civil applications. People's homes fall into sinkholes. Like it's a major problem in a lot of places. It's been studied very heavily. So there's a lot of models and cartoons I've included kind of to show you like what's, been studied for a long, long time, and how they understand it. And the geometries of the two match, like what I saw in the seismic match very well to a lot of the well-established kind of models that have been used for a long time.
Yeah. Wow. If you've got some stuff that you would like to show us, go ahead, please. You can.
You're ready,
Yeah.
hey?
Yeah. Let's
Yep,
do it.
let her go.
Okay, let me just share my screen here.
All right.
So yeah, this is recycling of, a presentation I did about just over a year ago for you guys, but I'll just do a quick recap on seismic, just kind of a little crash course for who's here. We use two different types of seismic on Oak Island. There's one called reflection seismology, and that's kind of the real star of the show. It's what's been developed for nearly 100 years now, with the great benefit of oil and gas kind of funding, trying to, because it is the primary tool for exploring for oil and gas in most of the world. So it's really been developed really well. So it's a really well-known tool. But like any tool, it's an imperfect tool. Seismic, it does a good job. It gives you at the end a pseudo image, we call it, but it's most akin to looking at kind of video game graphics of reality. It's not giving us it's not giving us photograph quality, right?
Right.
So that's something to always keep in mind when we're looking at these images. That being said, there's some tools and kind of tricks to getting the most out of the data and making it really, really look good and make it easier to interpret, because that's really the tough part here is the interpretation. The other one is refraction seismology. That's the one that I used with the ship-shaped anomaly. It's still the same energy. It's just it's a different mode of movement. So we'll just stick to reflection seismology in this talk. The reason why we used it here on the island, I get a lot of questions why then you use GPR or something like that. The problem is the solution channel, the depths of the money pit are really too deep to have effective GPR penetration, especially because it's so filled full of water. Because GPR is an electromagnetic wave, it attenuates really quickly, and you don't have the penetrating power that you need. Seismic, on the other hand, has amazing penetrating power. It goes through water, it goes through solids, and it goes as deep as you want. We obviously miniaturized it for the island here, kind of pushed the limits of what we could with the gear, because usually the gear is used in much larger applications, but the final result was quite reasonable and everything worked out as good as I kind of hoped. So it was a great tool here. Just keep in mind that it's an imperfect tool. It just shows you send energy down. They're called acoustic waves. You're basically deforming the material, and that's why it works so good at penetrating, is you basically bump the material and then that bump just moves all the way down, and it sends you a return signal every time it hits an interface where there's a change in density. And that's the key that we're really after here. The seismic is sensitive to changes in density, and that's why it is effective at imaging what we're after here. Now, the sad part is we're not going to see a treasure chest with it. We have basically seismic information every 3 feet on basically the entire east side of the island. So you have a sample point every 3 feet. That works out to, like, I think 180,000 seismic traces or sample points. So we covered the island pretty good, about as good as you can with seismic. It's still going to be tough to pick out, with what we're describing as a treasure chest, even 6 feet in size. But it does help answer the question geologically in the money pit, what is really going on in here. So here's just a quick overview of where we shot seismic on the island. So of course you've got the swamp shot. You've got this huge East Drumlin one, we call it, the big red one. We have the money pit one, of course. We did do one on Nolan's property. And then we were talking earlier about the latrine that was up in this area, actually. So this is your lot 15's up more here. That latrine talk was over in this program, kind of further east, but lots of data. We use this little thumper tool and these tiny little pentolite explosives. These pentolite explosives are military grade. They're very energetic. So even though they're just tiny, they're like firecrackers. You'll see in this little video here, if anyone remembers, We're just over here actually behind those casings that you see have vaporized a 3-foot stump there. So that's just one of these charges. So even though they're tiny, they send a lot of energy down. We need that to kind of get down as deep as we need it to. We also have, this is good LiDAR information. It also kind of illustrates with the vertical exaggeration how you do have two distinct islands. It's pretty clear.
love that picture. Yeah, that's crazy.
It's really amazing. You can see the topography on the east side relative to the west side. So pretty dramatic.
There's something about a line you said. There's a line that runs right through.
Yes.
Right through that whole thing of where it separates one side from the other.
Yeah, I'll sneak to that. Yeah, sorry, it's not a super polished presentation. I'll just try.
That's okay. That's okay. We're not polished, so yeah.
Yeah, we're not even shiny.
This is an example though that. So this is actually starts. This is the beginning of that kind of geological regime discussion I was talking about. This is an outcrop of the Halifax slate. This is kind of what it looks like when it's just exposed at the surface. This big, huge, massive chunks of this stuff underlay the west side of the island. So the whole west side of the island is basically a thin layer of glacial till, which is basically clay laying on top of this hard stuff.
Right.
But
so that's from the swamp to lot 1, basically.
Correct. East side of the island, it's a drumlin, but there's none of that Halifax slate underneath. It's sitting on kind of more shallow marine limestones and things like that. But what you have is this huge blob of glacial till. And so these are kind of examples of, surface, really obvious kind of surface glacial deposits. Here's a nice drumlin here in the bottom right there. A little more elongate and a smaller scale than Oak Island, but gives you an idea of how these things kind of look. And it's not a stretch now when you look at the east side of the island that it is, got that same smooth kind of directional profile. And they're deposited as the ice retreats. Chunks of stuff basically are dropped, and as it pulls away, it smooths it all out and gives it that nice smooth shape. Here's what you're asking about, Jeff, is this is a line. So if you look in the bottom right there, here's that LiDAR image again. Basically, that data set that we shot over the swamp, it just touches the west side of the island, but just enough to see. If you look here, my cursors, can everyone see that?
I can, yeah.
Okay, good. So all these these are called reflectors in seismic speak, and they're quite massive looking. They're big, thick reflectors. These are part of those Halifax slate and other kind of associated, like they're igneous metamorphic type rocks. They're massive, heavy, thick. And then you have all this kind of junk up here, kind of weak reflectors. That's the glacial till. And the next image I show you will kind of have it annotated so you can kind of see. But basically you got the west side of the island just propped up on top of this thing, but you see this ragged edge, that's it, subcropping.
Yeah, okay.
And then all these nice higher resolution or higher frequency kind of reflectors, that's that more clay and sand rich glacial till drumlin sitting on top of the east side of the island. So if I go down to this image, I've basically got like a little cross section. And so this kind of a real simple cartoon. I've got the slate drawn in there. So that's down here. You got that thin veneer glacial till, this in-between area. So there's like a little sag there. It's like a hinge point. And that's where the swamp wanted to settle in. The water sits in low. And then, of course, you've got this big wad of glacial material dropped as a drumlin out here in, now, of course, sea level is lower here too, right? This so this is limestone and some sort of carbonate, anhydrites, gypsums. It was all exposed. And then this wad of glacial till was dropped on top. And that's really what it is. It's two separate pieces in a really simple nutshell. It was really never one. They're just two completely different geological regimes. So it's. Any questions on that? Does that seem?
Wow, no, thank you though. I'm glad we're going over this again because this is really good stuff. Thank you.
It's fascinating. And I mean, when I
It is.
saw that, because I wasn't sure either, but when I saw that seismic line, I was like, oh yeah, it's very clear that there's
Well,
two very
it really
different.
helps tie it all together now that you can see, because everybody said, "Oh, swamp. Was it open? Was it closed? 2 islands, 1 island?" But
Yeah.
now you can see we can tie this back to what we're seeing now and what they're finding in this in what's been actually constructed
Mhm.
on the edge of each island, right? Then this now even makes greater sense, really, when you think about it.
Great, great.
Hmm.
All right, so we'll dive into what we all want to talk about. The money pit today. So this is a real nice aerial image that I've been using since 2019. And I'm showing this now because there's a number of surface elements that also support this whole multi-level dissolution system. I want you to pay close attention to these kind of circular features here. I remember walking around Smith's Cove before they built the cofferdam a few years back, and I could see these things. I was like, what the hell are these round things? It was really quite interesting. So I'm going to touch on that near the end. The other thing is this cave-in pit, or this little sinkhole lake. This kind of represents an earlier stage of the dissolution process that has affected the money pit area. Put another way, I believe this is how the money pit area looked earlier on. Obviously, there's been so much activity with all the searchers. It's completely destroyed any of that evidence, but this little kind of cave in the lake is being formed because there is dissolution happening below it as well. And that's all part of this whole system, like I said, that goes all the way up to Smith's Cove. And then obviously here's one of these models I just grabbed from the net that just shows real simple kind of description of what's happening in a cross-section view of this kind of beginnings of a dissolution system, but it makes total sense. So very early on, you just get. So the other thing I have to mention is that kind of those carbonates that are underlay what we call the bedrock, they were exposed, and before any glaciation happened, they were actually exposed at the surface to rain and what we call meteoric waters. And that's how the dissolution process starts. So these cave systems were already well formed before any glaciation happened, because they had to be exposed. They had to let the water get in there and the chemistry start dissolving the rock. So start slowly, but as you start to get dissolution, you start to get subsidence at the surface, ponds start to form. So that's your cave-in pit. That's why it exists there. But it's a hint as to what's going on in the larger system. Here's another real simple cartoon, and kind of really the backbone of the interpretation I've given the seismic here, and I think it makes a ton of sense. It's called a covered collapse sinkhole, and it happens when you have a clay-rich overburden, which is glacial till on the island here. It's very clay. You hear Marty complain about it all the time. So what happens is you had this dissolution happening. It was already very well formed, but then glaciation came and it covered up with all this clay. But as the cave continues to dissolve, you start to have that clay collapse in and starts to build up inside the cave. And this is where a lot of that soil material and junk that they find down in there, it's coming from, because it was caving in from the surface. And it continues to happen. And then what happens is eventually it collapses in and it slumps down and creates this depression. This is where the story kind of ties into what the boys saw in 1795. Was there a depression at the surface here that was exploited? And what's really cool about this is the depression is really at the epicenter of the cave. And so if this was exploited, it's not a stretch that if they didn't put it down into the cave system, they kept in a shallower kind of regime that was easier to access above the water table, but it's not a stretch that could slowly migrate in as things continue to collapse. So here's just another example, modern analog grab of what it might have looked like if somebody came to the money pit area before anything had happened. Oh, this looks like something that we can dig easier because it's more unconsolidated. It's already low. Can we put something in here?
Interesting.
That's a question for everyone, of course. I won't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I won't theorize on the motives or anything like that, but it's not a stretch that somebody would be like, that looks like a place to.
And this cave in that you're showing over here in this left picture,
Yeah,
in the cartoony picture, is like what would have happened with the cave in pit.
correct.
Right?
Yeah, this would have filled in with water, but then eventually, sometimes it breaches, right?
And
The
drains
base
out.
will breach, and it may lose the water. So obviously, here this is not filled in with water. Perhaps the money pit was at that stage; it wasn't filled with water, or it had water and it had breached, and there's nothing at surface.
I mean, it makes total sense. I mean, especially if you're experienced in digging holes or mines or shafts or burying things, you're going to look around. You're going to find a spot that looks, hey, this looks like a great spot to dig. This should be easy digging based on what we know about other caves and caverns and treasures or whatever we've hid, buried, dug, whatever. It makes a perfect choice for a spot.
And I think because of its unconsolidated nature too, I think that would have made life a lot easier too with the digging. If you're within that kind of sinkhole part, everything's already broken up for you a little bit.
And it makes sense too, because Tom talks about how hard digging is up there. You know, all these rocks in everybody's backyard, and well, they weren't digging through rock; they were digging through something like this to get to those depths. You know, not that they couldn't have done it if they needed to, but I was always thinking how hundreds of years ago are guys with hand-driven tools getting through that material.
Yep.
And I wonder if that is an ancient technique. I don't know enough about the history of shafts and mining, but perhaps they did try to exploit things like this on the surface. I don't know. It'd be an interesting topic to kind of look into.
Yeah.
So here's kind of a first glimpse of the seismic. I wouldn't. This is just a cross-sectional view of the seismic. It looks pretty wild, and that's why takes a lot of years to learn how to interpret it, because it does make an image, but it can be a chaotic image. So on the left is something called what we just kind of call basic seismic. This is kind of what it looks like coming out. You've got these alternating sets of reflectors with, there's peaks and troughs, different polarities, and basically each one of these kind of blue or yellow lines, that's like a reflection. There's some sort of density change happening there, and a reflection is coming back. But to really simplify things, you can convert the seismic into something called acoustic impedance, which is really the true physics behavior that we're exploiting with seismic. It's physical property, and what it is it's a combination of how fast energy travels through the material, so velocity, but more importantly, density in this case. It's sensing density changes. So the grays and blacks, those are low density regions. The reds are high density, and the yellows and greens are kind of more mid-grade kind of densities. So right away you can see where I got my yellow box there. That's a large low density kind of, almost circular feature, and that's the cave. So that's the upper, what they're calling the solution channel, I'm calling more of a larger cavern type low density feature. Down below that, that's the more linear solution channel, or I'll even call it a solution river. And there's a model also I'll show that kind of supports that kind of geometry to it. So they're both dissolution features, but they're a little different.
So your scale, Jeremy, on the left-hand side going down, what's the measurement there? Is that feet?
So that's unfortunately in time. This is just
okay.
So seismic is measured in time. That is one of the difficulties with it. So it's measured in travel time. So the converter.
So we're looking at a music track almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it is the fourth dimension time. It's just it's not. So you convert time to depth using velocity. So if you know how fast the energy moves through the rock or the subsurface, you can convert that time into depth. That is one of the bigger problems with seismic, is every different lithological unit or material down there moves a little different speed. So there's techniques to recover that information. But the neat part here on Oak Island, because everything's happening so shallow and close to the surface, and the till is pretty homogeneous, the velocity is pretty constant from all the work that I did. So depth estimates are fairly reasonable. So this first large low density region, this comes out to be around 150 feet when I do the depth conversion using those constant velocities. So it's right on with what they're seeing with their boreholes and the historical information.
Yep.
Same thing, these little dark, subtle low density areas, those are part of the searcher tunnels. And I will touch on them quickly, and they're all around 100 feet, we'll say, give or take. That's kind of their median depth, it seems like, is 100 feet. So once again, the velocity I used, I was able to ground truth it because we had some known depths. It all made sense. Everything went around. And then this deeper solution channel, that's around 200 plus feet. So all the numbers are going around in terms of what they're seeing with the boreholes. So yeah, so here's what like I mentioned, I'm just going to touch on quickly because we did talk about them a lot the last time. This is that 100-foot, 75 to 100-foot depth geobody. So the other thing I did in my work was there's another tool I can use to basically say, I want to shrink wrap only these features with these ranges of acoustic impedance or density. I only want the low density regions because we know that that's either some sort of a cavern or some sort of a tunnel. We assume.
And water would be considered low density?
Well, yeah, water would be definitely lower density for sure. Okay. So, and that's the neat part. I did calculations to be like, okay, what kind of densities am I getting in these caverns? And it's definitely not the density of water. It's higher than water, but it's not as dense as the solid expected material, say clay. So as we see with the drill bit, they bring up that slurry that Terry gets so worked up about. When he sees the slurry coming up, he's happy because it's it's mostly water, but it is filled with muck, and it's all that clay that fell down in. It all collapsed in over time. So I shrink wrap those low density anomalies at this 75 to 100 foot range. This I believe to be searcher tunneling, whether it's intact or collapsed, it's still somewhat a lower density than kind of the native kind of clay fill, or even the clay backfill after they did fill in the big digs. Like I mentioned, it's not a photograph. It's an imperfect tool. It's not razor sharp, so that's why they don't look like nice, perfectly straight square tunnels, and they are probably deformed because they have collapsed. So there's a little bit of both things going on, but there is very definitely a tunneling low density system that goes from, so this is essentially the center of the garden shaft region. This was kind of an epicenter of searcher tunnels. And then one of them went directly over to C1, and C1 doesn't get talked about very much anymore, but it was a real key well or borehole or caisson, I guess. But it ties into the greater story, which ties it into H8. H8 is really, really key. But regardless, we're told the searchers knew where they're going. They were tunneling to C1. There's something that they liked over here. This unusual looped arm here, unsure what to make of it. I know Rick mentioned back when I presented this that there was talk of the searchers had basically tunneled around something. I can't remember the full details on that.
There's a thought one time that they'd actually done a spiral tunnel to go down.
Yeah, something like that. And the geometries they're much more complex than, it's essentially a cartoon of reality what we're looking at, but it is definitely hinting that tunneling was done here. The other really cool anomaly is this multi-forked, or this forked anomaly that I believe I showed last time I was on here. This one's cool because one of the arms points straight at H8, and what happens in between C1 and H8 I think is the real kind of most important part of the story here in the Money Pit. So the searchers were definitely zeroing in on something, and we're told they knew where they're going. We can do a quick little video here. Kind of fly into these anomalies.
This is so cool.
You can see inside of these. sorry, it's a little jerky. It is hard to kind of drive it really smooth, but you're going to come inside now. Now you can, and it looks like a collapsed tunnel of some sort. You know, it's kind of deformed and smushed looking, but definitely an open, low density pathway in an otherwise fairly homogeneously dense material.
This to me is amazing stuff right here. This is, yeah, exactly.
I've got folders and folders of these videos and
so now we're in that little roundabout.
Yep, correct. Yep, that's right, Seth. Yeah, we're cruising around the roundabout. So you see I'm trying to make the turn. So yeah, that roundabout thing is very, it's a puzzling. It's a very major feature, as you can see, and it's
it's pretty incredible too when you think that even by today's standards, they're 70 feet below sea level.
Yeah, it's how they kept the water away long enough is puzzling. So
yeah, exactly. That's it is for me as well.
Anyways, yeah. So there's no coordinates per se on these, so it's fairly safe, I think. But I'll confirm it with the team.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of people ask about Aladdin's Cave. Was that in your data as well, over where Aladdin's Cave is?
I have to apologize. I'm not super familiar with where Aladdin's Cave would be.
Southeast of the garden shaft.
Okay, down in there.
Yeah, southeast of the garden shaft.
So that would be
almost directly south of the garden shaft, actually. About 100. So H8's right there would be east of H8 over that.
So it'd be in the fork anomaly there.
Maybe so, yeah. Maybe so. That might be part of it, or down in that little handle down there in the bottom part of it, the yellow part in the bottom.
And by the way, the color coding, red means it's elevationally higher.
Okay.
So that you can kind of get the three-dimensional kind of feel too, just from the color. So reds are the highest. The greens are kind of the lowest. Oranges are somewhere in the middle. So you can see those two forks, like the fork tines, they're different elevations too, right?
Yeah, they are.
Like they tunneled up with one and down with the other. So it's pretty, it's pretty artificial looking for sure. So anyways, we've established that we have searcher tunnels that are kind of, shark circling, I think, the kind of key area here of the dissolution system. Is just another look at the fork there. Actually, we can go into that too if you want to see that video quick. Let me know if I'm getting too long here, Jeff, and I'll.
Oh, this is fascinating.
No, I agree. This is really interesting to me.
Yeah, there's a good view of the two different levels on the.
Wow.
Where are they?
So yeah, all I did was say, take these low density regions and and just shrink wrap it for me. So it gives you about as much detail as you can on the inside and the outside of that anomaly.
Wow, that's cool. All
right, so we're going to jump into the solution channel. We'll call it the solution channel for now. This is the upper one, and I guess it is a channel. Now, there is some deviation on you've already seen some of the team's interpretations of where the solution channel might go further kind of north up here. But this is kind of the real key main cavern I'm calling. And so you see H8 labeled down there, so you can orient yourself. This triangle is C1. The garden shaft is just kind of over here. So it's a much larger system, and there's probably has different degrees of kind of fill from the material that's caved in. And I think that's what leads to probably some of the chaotic interpretation of some of the borehole results, because it's filled full of junk, right? And and there's rubble in there too. And it's so, I'm sure there's a number of false negatives that have, confounded kind of the interpretation process for the team using the borehole in all cases. But, the seismic, like it's responding to low density regions, and it's stitching this whole low density region together. and it matches the model of a lot of these cave systems. The upper level tends to be a little more cavernous than the lower level, which is a little more sinuous and linear. That being said, you can see that there's hints that it extends all the way to Smith's Cove, and that makes sense. You have this carbonate platform that extends all the way out here. This was all exposed to meteoric water, rain. It was dissolving at this level, but this seems to be a real epicenter. This was kind of like the main cavern. The cave-in pit's somewhere over here, that surface water body, so it's probably responding to this here.
Wonder if there's any dye in the cave-in pit.
Yeah, I mean, there could very well be
if it's all connected.
Yeah.
So this is a cross section. Fortunately, my little image to the right here is not super helpful, but basically I took a seismic line that connects C1 to H8. And this is really kind of my smoking gun for the model I'm using for kind of this dissolution feature and how it would have affected the surface. So you have this low density feature. This is what I shrink wrap. So that's what you guys have seen in a few different ways. But then I was always puzzled, why is there this higher density thing at the bottom here? But then as I started doing a little more research, I realized that this is that rubble buildup is what that is.
Yeah.
So as this material is falling down, that's the buildup. So what this tells us is this is the epicenter of the cave-in pit. So any expression at the surface would have been essentially directly above this.
And you see the higher area above it, like it was falling down into that. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and then of course below that you see the other low density region. That's a secondary dissolution system. Now the connectedness between them varies, and that's what they're seeing with the boreholes. They're seeing some cases where they don't hit the bedrock until 220 or something like that. I believe that was J.5, 8.5. So that one they basically found they went right through a kind of a conduit that was directly connecting both the upper and lower dissolution ones, and so they never really found that bedrock. But in a lot of other cases, they're not directly connected, and that also fits the models that have been out for a long time.
Yeah. Well, they weren't directly connected, probably, but now because of all the boreholes and everything else that they put in there, and caissons that they put down in there, are they maybe connected now? And we had Ian Spooner last season talking about how he was up in that area where he was sampling last night, and he heard that collapse happen. He heard a very large collapse. He thought it was thunder at first. He's like looking around. It's a clear day. Where's that thunder coming from? And he realized it was coming from underground. So more collapses happening all the time, even current, and so that would open that up, wouldn't it? Connect the two together in some way.
Absolutely, Jeff. And dissolution is still happening through the natural process too, I have no doubt.
Yep.
So, but yes, so what I did here with this image was, this is the cross section in the two-dimensional world, looking at the seismic, pretty clear. I call this thing the podium. This is also what I called the teardrop anomaly, if you remember that.
Yes, I do remember that very much. Yep.
That is the teardrop anomaly. I didn't know back in the early interpretations. I wasn't 100% sure what to make of it. Now I'm almost certain it is this buildup.
Yep.
But why this is important is because this is where everything that was near surface has fallen down to. So if there was something up shallower that was collapsing down, it would have landed in this pile or would have kind of bounced off the edges of it, however it got down there.
Yeah.
And we see that H8 was a really key well. I mean, they found human bone in that thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yes.
They found bone, they found pottery shards, they found stuff in that one. So he's just off the southern kind of tip of that. So I think this whole region around it needs to really be explored carefully. That's kind of where I'm leaning towards. Over here, this is the three-dimensional geobody model of this. So you can see what this, so this, if you can see here my cursor, it's quite small. This is H8 right here. So he's right on the tip of that kind of spoil pile. Here's the main buildup. So the epicenter up to surface is somewhere straight up here. But then you have this whole low area that kind of surrounds it. And I think that material would have, fallen down, rolled off this, and settled in these lower points, which fits the theory that they're using. Everything's just falling to the lowest point. Now, of course, if this is open and connected to the lower dissolution channel, then of course it could continue to move downwards. But I think they're disconnected enough. I think it's worthwhile looking at these depths, which are the 150 to less than 200 depths first, really getting a good sense of that.
Which explains why in past seasons when they're putting the caissons down, they stop at the 150, say 180 foot level.
Yeah, because they're hitting bedrock. They're hitting this hard bottom. There are spots for sure, and maybe that's where some of these low points are connection points, but it's, they're pretty limited actually. I think the connection points, they're not as, other than new boreholes going through, but they're not big huge holes, right? They're smaller conduit connections, and that kind of fits the models. And I think we'll get to that in a minute. This is kind of my key slide here. This is it. Like this spall pile, this is the epicenter of what I believe will have been some sort of depression at the surface. That's what the boys saw at the surface, with the remnants of that depression, and it was essentially directly over top of this. So if we believe in that theory that something was buried above the water table or not too deep into it, and they want easier digging in an already sinking area, well, it would have been directly above this. And we have a big cavern where it can all settle into, so it all kind of goes around. This is a map view again of this section here. So it's just basically mapping the low density component. So here's the teardrop anomaly, and that's that buildup. That's where all the stuff is kind of piled up there. There's H8. This has always been interesting to me too, the slightly little high density spot here. So the reds in this case, these are low density. I used red to indicate that anything that's low density, that's your cavern, that's red and yellows. Interestingly, C1 was on kind of in this weird little crevasse. I've always been puzzled by this too. I've always tried to make sense, but the shapes of these things are complex. They're very complex, but C1 was right on the edge of something.
Yeah, it was an open cavity down there. They put a camera down and it saw it was a room, or an open cavity. So
so there's something. There is a little, like, the edges are not knife edge, and this is something me and Marty brought up quite often. Like, Seismic's got fuzzy edges, and it does. So this, there still could be a slightly low density area over here. It just didn't quite image out nicely for us. Now, there has been a borehole that went into the center of the teardrop. It was before I'd done this analysis, I believe, or not long afterwards. I can't remember. Not sure. I'm still trying to get some feedback. I'm trying to complete the feedback with the team with, what are we finding in some of these ones? But I think, to me, they drilled into the dense stuff. They drilled into all the stuff that fell down, all the clay. I think it's this perimeter you want to look at. You want to see the stuff that kind of hit that and rolled off.
Right.
And I think that's how. How did you get human bone at H8? How did you get pottery shards down at H8, which was at 150 feet? Like, it was right where it was supposed to be. So did it roll off the edge? And so I'm really interested in looking around there. So I tried to tie in the most recent kind of drilling activity to this. The scales are all off. I tried my best, and I'm trying to get some coordinates from Steve right now and kind of get it exact, but I kind of eyeballed it as best I could. So obviously here's H8 down here. what I do like that I'm seeing is their kind of solution channel epicenter is where my epicenter is. Like they're zeroing in on the exact same thing as me.
They are. Yeah, that's the area of interest right now. Yep.
Now the hell of a thing is that all the boreholes that are mentioned in the last few episodes, they're all outside my lips of kind of real interest.
How deep is that right there?
This is at like 150 feet.
Okay. All right.
This is like the teardrop anomaly.
Yeah.
We're just going to say 150 feet. There's going to be a little bit of movement on that, but this is the kind of the depth I have. Like I said,
so this teardrop 150 feet, are we in the solution channel?
Yeah, you're right in the top, right? Like you're from like 150 to 160 feet.
And your description of it being more of a cave system, it really does match the drill behavior when they're saying, oh, we got 20 feet of no resistance. And I was thinking, well, how big is that solution channel?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking this little channel, but what you described, now I'm thinking, oh, okay, I can visualize it a lot better now.
But it's filled full of junk too, right? So there's some areas that probably have more accumulation of material than others, but it really is probably a fairly open system, or was, right, until it started filling up. And I think unfortunately that provides false negatives potentially for the team occasionally with the drill bit when they run into whatever all this junk is down there, because it'll also be chunks of probably the limestone and stuff that have caved in on, including the clay. So you're going to get a mixed bag of stuff. We'll say it's at about 100, and we'll say the top of this image is at 150 feet. We'll say that teardrop anomaly is probably sitting around 160 to 170. It's a little bit. It's at the bottom of the cave system, obviously, because everything's falling down.
This is really cool how it lines up with where they're working. It really is.
Yeah, that was amazing. Like that. I just put that together this afternoon. Like tried to tie it all. I'm like, well, they're zeroing in on essentially the same thing that I was thinking. So So yeah, just some video inside again, or sorry, that's just an image in 3 dimensions of this cave system I'm calling. You got some landmarks here, so you know where we are. That's the eastern road around the money pit. So you can see that this main cave system actually continues further, but this was the one data set, specifically the money pit 3D shoot that it cut off there. That's why there's a straight edge to it. I didn't tie in the other one for this particular thing, but regardless, you can kind of see the topography and geometry to the cave, and you can see there's high parts, low parts, but it looks like a cave, right? Like a cave shape, and kind of got a domed roof, we'll say. And there is some interesting, real subtle features. This little dimple here I talk about, I wonder if that little dimple is kind of the portal to the surface where all the stuff was falling through.
Oh,
feel like that might be the subtle expression. The one thing about seismic, one of its blind spots is that anything that's vertical, it can't. If no reflections come off of it, there's a blind spot. So it needs to have some horizontality to it. Regardless, there's a little subtle dimple here. It's in the right spot to maybe be kind of where all that conduit for that material from the surface.
Oh, there's that box everybody kept talking about.
God, yeah, that thing is a hell of a thing too. It really does look like the bottom of a shaft, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So there's the low. So you're looking at the bottom of the cave here. So blues are low, reds are high again. That's what the color coding gives you. But you can see there's this crevasse. Oh, now we're going inside. But as you get inside here, and you're going to see when we look at the deeper solution channel, things look different inside of it. This is much more open looking, right? And there's that teardrop anomaly, or the podium, I call it now. But largely a fairly open cavern, which you expect a cave to be, right? From what we see. Okay, I'm trying to move along here. So just some more interior kind of pictures. That little dimple I mentioned.
Oh, that's it right there.
That's it right there. So just like a little drop down on the surface, and it's right in the center of kind of the podium. So
I want to go down there. I want to dive down there and go check all this out.
Well, that'd be cool, yeah. This is way to the east, so you're standing to the east looking west. So you can see it kind of steps down too. Once again, they got complex geometries. But this thing is key to the whole thing. That is the epicenter of the cave. And I think if there was anything that fell from surface, that's where it's hanging out around the perimeter of it. All right. So here's some modern analogs or some pictures to kind of help you envision this 2-layer system. So this is an outcrop of a limestone cave system in France. So you can see there's an upper level. And to put for scale too, right? The money pit really only occupies like something like that, right? Like this is quite a large area, but you can see that there's caves up here, and then you got some bedrock, but then if you look around, there is a second layer of caving. If you look at the little cartoon here, that's what you kind of see. And this is what I was mentioning, how it's not completely connected, the 2 levels. There's usually just a few conduits, a little more narrow than the whole system in cross section. And they call this an underground river. If you look at the geometry of the lower dissolution system, it's more sinuous, more like a river.
Yep.
And here, this cartoon I grabbed from the web quickly. Well, here's our upper dissolution cave system.
Yep.
Small conduit down to a more sinuous river-like system, and that's what we see here.
I think that's what we got there. Yep.
Yeah. And so this is at the greater than 200-foot level.
Yeah, greater than 200 feet. Yeah.
Yeah. And feeds all the way down to Smith's Cove. Interestingly, it goes around the cave-in pit, but I guess the point is, yes, something could have maybe gotten down into this deeper system, but I think it's a much lower probability. Everything's sitting up in the cavern, hopefully. And then there's these things again, but we're gonna just look at this 3D again.
And this is the lower one?
This is the lower one. So we'll go inside and see. There's a lot more.
Oh, wow.
Kind of little chambers and, pillars and stuff like that. Because it's more of this sinuous kind of river. And if you look back at that France analog, there was hints that it was more compartmentalized and part of that sinuous nature of how it's all dissolved. Weird little things like that, call them hanging caves and stuff like that. But a very different feel to them than the bigger, the shallower dissolution cave. Okay, so this is the final piece, and this is not as important to the story, but it actually does tie into this whole dissolution kind of system and would potentially explain the flood tunnel phenomena.
Okay.
So these circles here, I believe, are remnants of submarine springs, they're called. And so what happens is in these dissolution systems, and here's an example from Gainesville in Florida, and it's almost a perfect analog to Oak Island. You got some highlands here, you got rain here, you got a fresh water table. It flows down through that dissolved limestone through here, and then it actually upwells in the marine environment in a crescent beach, which is exactly what this is. This is a crescent beach. So these circular features, I was always like, what the hell are these? And they always had like different kind of plant growth in them too. They're very green and vegetated. So they're mostly fresh. Well, there's fresh water coming out of here. And so it kind of matches the geometry of the flood tunnels.
Yeah, it does.
It all ties in, and they're seasonal. Depending, you can actually have inflow and outflow happening through them depending on the time of the year.
Ice holes, anyone?
The other cool thing is these are very well understood.
Yep, Cat.
Way in the past, because they actually use these as freshwater sources. So here's a nice old ship, and they knew where to find fresh water out in the marine environment. But I think
Crazy.
it ties into this model, right? This whole karsted model, but it also kind of maybe explains that flood tunnel phenomenon. It's a Swiss cheese. It's all connected. It's all connected to the hydrogeological system of the island.
So even if there was a flood tunnel, wouldn't this have rendered a flood tunnel pretty much like useless?
But yeah, just the Swiss cheese nature of it's just there's no stopping it, right? The water.
Yeah, that's what Marty had said. Yeah, he said there's no way that they could block it off now at this point, other than doing something like a big dig freeze or something like that. Okay, let's have a few questions. I know Matt was just asking, Jeff, does Jeremy find any distinction between man-made and natural tunnels? Could the original depositors have tapped into and used natural formations? Yeah, we kind of talked about that a little bit. I think so, hey?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely. I think it's probably there was a combination of it. I mean, the big question always is, how do you deal with the water? How do you tunnel below the water table? Which is why I think this theory of, whatever was buried above the water table or not very far into it, and then it's maybe moved its way downwards.
Yeah.
But I think it's not a stretch that humans were trying to exploit existing natural features and then expanding on them.
Yep. Anyone else? I think Kat asked about the ice holes, because Dan Blankenship had talked about seeing ice holes, and if there is that water coming up and it was warmer than the surf or the water out there, it might actually create those and melt that ice or something. I don't know. I mean, that was something I always wondered.
Yeah, the freshwater is less dense than the seawater, so it will push its way up, and perhaps. I mean, I'm not an expert on the phenomenon, but I think, from what I've read, I don't see how wouldn't break the ice perhaps when it's upwelling.
Yeah, they will. We have them here, like in the Kennebecasis River out here. It's a tidal river, but yet in the wintertime you'll have these holes open up, and it's from the fresh water coming out from the streams and the brooks, and it bubbles its way to the surface.
Yep. Barbara Duncan was saying Dunfield dug pit. It was 100 feet diameter and about 110 feet deep, I think, but it was a cone shaped. So all that backfill definitely would have changed the surface, the densities, very much so, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah. And you do see that if you look at it in a larger scale, the density in the shallower section of the Money Pit area is slightly different than kind of the more native kind of densities you see to the north, kind of further up topography in the drumlin where it's been less disturbed. So there is a subtle density difference. I mean, the reality is they just they put the clay all back together, and as time goes on, it also compacts itself.
You're right. Yeah.
It probably will return to a more native density. So the density contrast is minimal, but it is detectable.
Yep. Jeanette says earlier, I wondered if there was any correlation to the subterranean cascade, underground waterfall type activity.
Well, I mean, I think during when it was exposed and a lot of the dissolution happened, because the sea level would have been lower, there could have been some sort of waterfall type scenario. You see that in a lot of the models.
Mm-hmm. Did you evaluate 10X and its connection to the solution channel?
That's a good question. I think it's just off, if I remember. I can't remember off the top of my head. Definitely I was asked to do that. I'm pretty sure that 10X was right on the edge of it. There was potentially some connection, but didn't seem to be in the main fairway that I kind of showed there. I'd have to map that out and figure it out again.
Okay. Here's one from Matt. He's a big picture. What does Jeremy think happened on the island? Big picture. He works on science. I don't know. It's hard to get these people to commit to anything like that.
Well, I'm going to call myself a reluctant treasure hunter now. It's
all right.
This experience has been a once in a lifetime and changed me. I'll say I was never really into treasure hunting per se, but I was fascinated by the story of the island when I first kind of heard of it. So it was definitely something that interested me. I grew up with the concepts of buried treasure by pirates and things like that, and made sense. I find it's been frustrating that there hasn't been more answers come out like everyone else, but it's hard to deny, like, the swamp had to have been used for something. It makes so much sense, and then it's not a stretch that people were doing something on the island, from there. So I think something of significance did happen here. It's tough for me to say if it's still here. Did Samuel Ball get it? I don't know, but I am a believer now.
Yep. It would be ironic if machinations of the flood tunnels in Smith's Cove was the element that caused the actual treasure to fall into the solution channel. If it was an accident, is it still there? Yeah.
I think it's actively dissolving. It is an active system, so it's always moving. So I think that, absolutely.
I think it's quite possible. I mean, and that's something I've been kind of afraid of. You put all that weight and stuff on top of that, with all that underneath that you've shown us, open cavities down there and all the drilling and boreholes and caissons and everything they put in
The
there.
vibrations alone.
The vibrations alone, right? I'm just afraid at some point the whole money pit's going to go and drop 20 feet.
That's a very real possibility.
Yeah, it is. That kind of scares me. Temple of Brutus asks, Jeremy, does the freshwater in the ground cause signal attenuation and dispersion that complicates or messes with the seismic readings?
No, like I mentioned early on, compressional seismic, which is what we used here, it transmits through freshwater, saltwater, no problem. And then, into the subsurface. There are obviously subtle density changes, but the signal is not attenuated to a point where it's not useful. So it didn't really impact the result.
That's good. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that whole thing with that. I used to think that maybe the treasure was there, and the people that came in mid 1600s came and took it out. But you go back to Ian Spooner in his water testing samples saying that according to what he's sampling, something's still there to be able to give those samples.
Yep.
So that keeps me hanging on to it's still down there, hidden someplace and that's what Rick was getting all worried about, was the fact that it may be out of reach now. They may never be able to get to it because of what the collapsing that's going on and the whole two solution channels maybe becoming one or partly. I don't know. I mean, it's crazy to think. What is the density under the very old well with concentration of silver? Under the very old well. I don't know. I'm not sure where the very old well, where is that at?
That was the old well that had that, on the other side of the island that was in the wintertime. It wasn't frozen, and they looked down and there was silver.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, I don't know. I don't think, lot 26-ish. Yeah, I don't think they've been, you guys didn't do any seismic over there, did you? Lot 26.
Yeah, no, I don't. Is that, I'm trying to remember.
Sam Ball had 27, 28 and all that right in that area, I think, and 26. Did he own 26, Tom? You had that all that.
I can't remember. I got to look at my map, but he owned 20. He owned 30, 31, and 32.
Yeah.
And he owned 6, 7, and 8.
Yeah.
I can't really remember the other three.
Yeah, I thought there were 26, 27.
Yeah, they probably were. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. The western part. Yeah.
They were almost opposite 6, 7, and 8. So.
Right. Yeah. Yep. So there was that old well over there. That's I don't know. You guys didn't do seismic over there. You did some magnetometer surveys, didn't you?
The other thing too to keep in mind is, and people say, oh, people were skeptics, not skeptics, whatever. We know people were on that island besides the indigenous people.
Oh yeah.
But we have no record of what the heck they were up to.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But we know they were up to something because they left the evidence behind.
Yeah, they did.
Right. So was there, everybody says, well, where is that treasure? I don't think there was a treasure. I think there were multiple deposits made there over time. And that's why there was different activity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Were they all made it, were they all made 15 stories underground? No, probably not. but
Yeah.
people were there and people did something.
Yeah, agreed.
Kat was asking, can you actually see the time change as the density changes faster through rock than through water and air or solid, liquid, or gas?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and you can, for sure. They are somewhat decoupled, density and velocity. You can have stuff that are low density and high velocity and vice versa. Like I mentioned, though, kind of the whole area here, because it's such a mix of that clay and mostly water, other than when we get to the limestones there, the velocity is pretty consistent. Like there's like a number I came out with is about 1,750 meters per second, which it kind of kept working all the depths where I had ground truth locations. But that's a good question, because there is definitely different velocities and through the various materials.
So if Craig Tester called you right now and said, "Okay, we're at a loss here. Where do we put a caisson down?" You say right there around that spot, that teardrop that you had
I
talked about?
think you should, right? Just plow into that and then see if you can search out beyond it somehow from there. I don't think they can do a mini shaft or something off. I'm not sure, right? But yeah, I think plowing one right on top of that and as big a one as you can would be a good way to go for sure.
Yep. That's where I'm at still, and that's kind of the area they're working. So we'll see. They're going to make their way. I know when they get the caissons going, we seen different. When I was there on the tour, and we were I was standing up there on the top of the hill, right above the garden shaft, and looking down at the money pit. And I was looking to see where we weren't allowed to take any pictures, but we could stand there and look at it. And I was trying to make a mental picture of where everything was, and they're making their way towards the garden shaft with the caissons when they do arrive, August, September timeframe. They start sinking them in, making their way towards the garden shaft or toward the baby blob area where that red dye is coming out of. So it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think Jeremy's right. I'm hopeful. I think that's as soon as we get to that teardrop, closer to that area, we're going to start seeing all sorts of artifacts and exciting things.
I mean, I still think H8 is the most significant finds. Like, I mean, you found bone. Like,
Yes.
Like, you found bone in there. Like, you can't forget about that, Like, and I think, did they not trace the ancestry back to the Middle East or something like that too? And was it not 1500s or something like that? Like, it was the right time.
Yeah. It was the right time frame. Yep.
How did a bone get down there, right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
Well, now you sound like us, Jeremy. Welcome. You can come back next episode.
Yeah, exactly. Joanna, thank you very much.
How did that happen?
Thank you for helping support the show. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, you're on board with us now. So
You're in.
Well, I hate to cut this off because I could surely keep on going, but we're at
it's
about 2.5 hours, and I know Tom is already. It's after 11 for you, so
don't worry about it.
For everyone else,
but watching a good movie. You're not going to bed now.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, this has been great. I really have appreciated you coming on, Jeremy and Sharon. I know we missed a lot of stuff. We got to have you come back. I mean, that's all there is to it. I know that they're going to continue with this, and they're going to continue talking about the Solution channel with all of this, and then once they get the caissons going. So if you got some time in the future, I'd love to have you come back and join us again. We'll spend a little bit more, and we'll get you going earlier. I know I was trying to hurry along through the rest of the show so we could get started with your part there, because I knew it would take it off. But next time we're going to have to start with you, and then we'll go through the rest of the show.
Now that you see what they're physically doing on the island, they've gone down to the 150, 160, 170. They're going to the 200. Now you can physically relate what Jeremy's showing to us from his
exactly
seismic, right to what they're actually doing. Like, it makes so much more sense. Yeah,
it really does. And I knew it would, and that's why I was really wanted to have you come on and talk to us about this, because I knew you were the right person to ask. And honestly, I can't believe that they haven't asked you back on the island to come out and do some more work out there, because
they're trying to work on something here. Yeah, well,
I know you can't talk about stuff.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned.